Welcome to the Strain Podcast, a Southgate Media Group production, where we talk all about Guillermo del Toro's new contaminating horror fantasy series, The Strain, that airs Sunday nights on FX. I'm your host, Blair Knight Graves, from showratings.tv, and with me today is Kyle Tremblay, who's also from showratings.tv. You can find us on Twitter at BlairLivesTV and at KyleLivesTV. Remember, Blair is spelled with an E, as in Edgar. And you can follow this podcast's Twitter handle at @TheStrainPod. Hi, Kyle. How are you doing today?
Blair with an E, also as in F. And I'm excited that we have a contaminating episode to talk about. That sounds like something that I would say.
That's pretty much exactly how I felt about Services Rendered, which will be the episode we're discussing, which is Season 1, Episode 6. Again, it's called For Services Rendered, and it's written by David Weddle and Bradley Thompson, who wrote Season 1, Episode 2, The Box, previously. Yes, so which was an episode that you and I felt iffy about. And I certainly felt iffy about For Services Rendered.
Yeah, this might be a little bit of a role reversal, because while I disliked large portions of this episode, I also ended up liking the part that I think you disliked the most.
It's true.
And so this will be fun. We
are going to jump in on that in just a moment, but I wanted to discuss some news with you about The Strain really quickly.
Ooh, Strain news.
First of all, it got renewed for a second season.
No surprise.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, it is officially renewed. So it will at least get 2 of the 3 to 5 seasons it's supposed to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was digging through their Facebook page, and I found out that Dutch Velders is going to become a main character.
Oh, no.
She is not from the books. She's a completely new character.
Oh, my problem is not that she doesn't appear in the books. It's that she's Dutch Velders.
Sorry, for those of you who are new to the podcast, the biggest difference between Kyle and I is that I've read the books and he has not.
Classic disclaimer.
But we both are not very thrilled with the character of Dutch Velders.
No, I'm gonna have to say no. That is not heartening news, although it is in line with everything I know about the show to this point. That, yeah. Of course, Dutch Velders is gonna be a main character. Why wouldn't she be? Yikes.
I watched an interview with her, and we couldn't figure out what her accent was, and I don't necessarily know that I figured out what it is on the show, but the actress is British.
Okay, so you are nearing an answer. You're on the right track towards tracking down what exactly this character is supposed to sound like. Because, wow, I mean, she only appeared in about a 3-minute scene 3 or 4 episodes ago, and then we talked about her for 20 minutes on the podcast because it was so hilariously bad.
Yeah.
So that's some news.
Yeah, and I think it's in the next episode that she's going to join the team. So that's
oh boy.
That's something.
I mean, I guess it's a spoiler, so sorry, but it is on their Facebook page, and also, I mean, I feel like people should be prepared for that. We should be bracing for the Dutch Velders back into the spotlight. Where is helpful neighbor Trip Taylor is my question. If Dutch Velders is coming back, can I get some Trip Taylor back here?
I think that the reason that Dutch Velders is returning to the series is because she is a very pretty lady.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's 100%.
Which is, something that I personally am against, bringing people...
Prettiness?
No, just creating and allowing a character to remain on a show or in a film simply because they cast somebody who is aesthetically pleasing, not because they're talented or because it's necessary to the plot.
Exactly so.
And based on what I know from the books, she's not necessary to the plot. So... Yeah. Bringing her back is just a way to have another pretty lady on the show. Right next to Nora. Which we will talk about the problems that this series has with women throughout this podcast.
And they are aplenty.
Yes. But why don't we just go ahead and jump into Oh, you know what? I lied, everybody. I wanted to tell everybody really quickly, I was a panelist at Wizard World Chicago this last weekend, which is why we're recording our podcast late. So I will be posting the audio for that panel if you want to hear my take on being a podcaster and being a journalist. And I will be posting that link on our The Strain Pod Twitter handle. So look out for that. It's going to be exciting.
Very exciting.
So this is my first time being on a panel, and I just want everybody to know. So, all right, let's jump into For Services Rendered, Season 1, Episode 6. All in all, Kyle, you seemed to be a little more thrilled with it than I was.
Oh, thrilled is strong. I think I wrote in my review that at about the half-hour mark, I was actually going to call it quits on The Strain. And only watch for our podcast. Like not, I would have kept watching because we're committed to this podcast, but I was going to turn off whatever part of my brain takes the show seriously. Because I thought the first half hour of this episode was so atrocious that I could not possibly consider this show as like a serious piece of television. Like, it was basically like, to me, the show was some like Home and Garden Network reality show in terms of how serious this all is. And we can get into that as we go through the episode. But the second half hour of this actually won me back, and especially the ending, which I know you hated, and we'll talk about. But all the flashback material kind of went somewhere, and I thought it was a sort of a bold choice to give it the focus that it did. And the ending was exciting and different, and overall, that to me salvaged the episode and sort of salvaged my opinion of the show. And so I sort of settled on a sort of middle rating for this episode.
Yeah, I thought that the flashback material, as you said in your review, which sort of is the centerpiece of the episode.
Yeah.
I thought that was from a much more high caliber show than The Strain. The dialogue, the acting, just the choices that they made for those characters in those moments, for Eichhorst and Citrakian. I just found it just wonderful.
Well, I mean, it's difficult because they're basically having a message board argument about Hitler. They're having the same argument that's been had a million times in like Usenet groups, which is a little bit rough. Like the overall subject matter I felt like was really hacky, but the actual specifics of the dialogue weren't bad. And what carried it is the two performances by the always delightful Eichhorst and young Abe, who I thought did a really good job in all the flashbacks this week.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I took a lot of notes about their dialogue. I agree that it's very message boardy, but there's a delivery there that is just
I think the saving grace was the decision, and I think the third flashback of the episode, to have Eichhorst be drunk and coming in, because that's when the whole debate happened, and it was kind of a neat little twist where he was even more jovial than usual, like jovially sinister, which is sort of Eichhorst's default setting, but it sort of ramped it up, and I just there was a very strong sense of dread with those scenes, that Eichhorst could do anything to him at any point, or he could kill someone at any point. Like, it was those scenes had menace to them, and in a lot of ways they were actually scarier than some of the present day horror material, even though nothing ended up happening in them. That was what was so wonderful about that. There was that moment when Eichhorst went to urinate in the corner. Yes.
That I thought. Yeah. The way that he unzipped his pants, not to get graphic, I thought that it was going to go a very different direction.
Me too. I think that was intentional.
Yeah, and it was a wonderful misdirect because it just shows how this very whimsical character, we constantly call Eichhorst whimsical on this podcast, this very whimsical, silly character is horrifying.
Yes.
He is terrifying. It is all in his body language, and it's his presence. It's not necessarily the words that he's speaking, but the way that he is just moving within the world in which he exists.
And the show gets a lot of mileage out of that. It has a lot of scenes where it's just Eichhorst and one other person, and Eichhorst is sort of smiling but doing something terrible, like when he was torturing the person last week, or his conversation with Jim Kent later this episode. And I mean, the show knows how to deploy Eichhorst, which might be the only character I can say that with full confidence about. But like that moment where I think you hit on the big moment of the scene when he unzipped his pants, because that was the show acknowledging that they know what they're doing with this scene. This scene is intended to have this undertone of menace. And I always like that when I feel like a show knows what it's doing, and knew exactly how that would play and what the audience would think when he started to do that, and then going through with the misdirect, and the fact that those flashbacks didn't end in like a bloodbath or anything. It ended in a revelation, but it wasn't like a violent revelation. I thought that was really cool because they didn't feel the need to pay off that menace, and I think the strain could do for a lot of restraint in that regard. And so I think the flashbacks from start to finish were the strongest element of this episode.
Well, and that drunken moment, that drunken flashback with Icarus in the Nazi camp when Citrakian is making the box that the master lives in.
Yes, as we find out.
Which is a great, wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Wonderful reveal.
They paid it off in an unexpected way.
Really, they really, truly did. But there was the conversation that they had about choosing to do nothing, which, again, is very much, as you said, message boardy. You could see that on 4chan or Reddit or something.
Well, yeah.
But at the same time, I think that speaks to the series as a whole and the motivation of the government so well. And it was on the nose, of course, but
yes.
it was at the same time, it was nestled into this totally different situation that you wouldn't necessarily recognize it right away.
Right.
And I liked that. I liked that a lot.
Yeah. Although they have had that line in like 5 episodes so far. Like literally that line in 5 episodes, delivered by different characters. F has said it like twice. Like this is the theme of the show that they are driving home with a sledgehammer. So I rolled my eyes when he said that. But at the same time, I get that, if you're watching this in a vacuum, then it would, it'd be good. It's just they just keep driving that point home, and obviously it's meant to explain the stupidity of everyone on this show. And it's just rough, but I digress.
That's okay. Well, let's go back. That's pretty much, we just were at the end. Let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, like Coldplay. Let's go back to the start.
Oh, why? I wanted to talk about that opening sequence with Mr. Luss coming home from a business trip. I also want to give a big shout out because that actor who plays Mr. Luss is Aaron Douglas, also known as Chief Galen Tyrell Tyrell on Battlestar Galactica, one of my favorite characters. Weird to see him come on for like the strangest, shortest little cameo where he just gets scared and drunk.
Yeah.
But wonderful nonetheless. Yeah, interesting. It's interesting that you mentioned this in your review. The Strain just decided to jump over the eclipse.
Yeah, the word I used in my review was punted. They punted on it. They just said, you know what? The eclipse doesn't actually matter because we're starting the next episode after the eclipse. It's like, okay, you had an entire episode building up the eclipse. I believe you and I talked in the podcast about how excited we were for all the incoming chaos that the eclipse would cause. This episode, first minute after the eclipse.
It was infuriating.
Yeah, right?
And on 2 levels. There's the level of, I think it would be wonderful for the Strain to just open up with people running through the streets in chaos.
Yeah.
And F and everybody, like, I mean, we saw F getting to Citrakian's pawn shop, like at the end of the last episode. But just like have any character. I don't care who it is. If it's Matt, the Sears manager, like anybody running through the streets, and we were watching like all the chaos around them. If it's vast, if it, I mean, obviously it wasn't going to be Felix and Gus, which we'll get to. But like that chaos is a really missed opportunity. First of all, so that's just like, as a television viewer, it would have been great to just cold open on that chaos.
Yes.
And have vampires everywhere and have it be terrifying. And then secondly, that's what happens in the books. So I'm sorry, I'm really upset.
Yeah. Well, now it's becoming a problem that we have completed 7 episodes, and the vast majority of the population does not know what is happening. that is now a problem. 7 is a big enough number to where this should be out by now. People
Yeah.
should be knowing, like, this should be this topic of conversation. Like, stuff we had public stuff happening with the vampires as far back as episode 2. Like, that's not even to count the whole plane thing. Like, this has been around long enough now that it is utterly ludicrous that Mr. Lust can return home and the cab driver's like, yeah, things are weird out. They're pretty quiet. Like, that is so, like, false. That rings so false that the cab driver's just driving around and is cool with it. Which is not even to mention that the cab driver then, when confronted with the vampire monsters, instead of flooring it, decides to shout, "What is this?" 20 times, and then get out of his car and attempt to shoot them.
Yeah.
Which was really maybe the icing on the cake of all the stupidity of minor characters on this show.
Well, and I think the icing of the cake of just how awful it is that the world isn't aware of what's
Yeah.
actually going on was Dutch Velders, who we discussed earlier, brought down the internet and the cell phones, which we mostly accepted in this episode because I think they used a landline when Mr. Lust called Ava at the beginning of the episode. But like every time he used his cell phone, it didn't work.
Yes.
But why do landlines and television work?
Yeah, why are there reports from the city? Why are there local radio announcers talking about it? Why is, like, it's just such a weird thing to me. It's just I don't have any sense of how communication is working right now.
Right. It's weird that she would keep everything up. Like,
Yeah.
oh, we don't want it to get spread through the internet. Yeah, but clearly the news people can walk around the street with news cameras and that gets broadcast all over the world.
Right. And there was a line in this episode where it was Abe telling F when F suggested that he wanted to make this public, spread the word. And I lost it. What was the line? It was just this tiny little thing where, oh yeah, Abe says that the world is more concerned with the internet being down. Like something along those lines. Like, I'm pretty sure it was Abe. Like, that the vampires have occupied them because all the news coverage is about the worldwide internet shutdown. And I wish, instead of making that a throwaway line, the show would, like, actually show that. Like, I wish that we didn't have to be following these characters 100% of the time, and that, like for last week's cold open, which we both really liked, where we took like a space shot of the world and listened to the radio, and that's a shot that isn't from any character's perspective. It's just giving us a sense of what's happening in the world. What the Strain fails to do every week is ground the show in the world. Mm-hmm. And for us to not have any worldwide sense of this communications thing, like for us to not get any kind of big picture sense of how that's affecting people's day-to-day lives, it is it's undermining everything. We're just living in this little bubble with like 4 characters that we're following. We have no idea what the world thinks. We have no idea what the people of New York think, how much the government knows. Like, we have no perspective in this show. There's just we have this one, like, painfully narrow point of view, which is F's, but it's nothing meaningful. There's nothing that makes this world feel lived in or feel like it's occupied by people that aren't the main characters on this show. And that's my big problem with this. Like, if I had some sense of how the communications outage was affecting people, I would maybe buy it a little more. But I just don't buy it. I just don't buy that this is something that happened, even though they keep telling me it is.
Right. And it's not just that, too, like with the communications going down, but also like later in the episode when they're in the subway train and Icarst and Satrakian have their confrontation as an old man and a vampire as opposed to a Nazi and a young man. And they're on the train and everybody around them is sick and coughing and taking like cough syrup and things like that. And like that is such an
I loved that.
I loved it too, but why isn't there a line of a stranger somewhere going like, wow, it's weird that plane landed and now everybody's sick. Like, why aren't people making any like logical connections?
Right. Why didn't we get another talk radio scene of someone calling in and like bringing up exactly what you just said? Or why in the subway scene, which I just thought was so flat, like that scene was like out of a bad Netflix movie. which we'll get to it, but I just thought that was a terribly boring scene. Despite like some like good character beats. But like, why doesn't that scene open not on our main characters in the subway, but just on people in the subway having conversations about like the topic that you just said? Like, why aren't they? Why aren't we getting like 2 minutes of just people talking about their lives, and then F and Nora enter the scene? You know,
Yeah.
like, why doesn't the strain do anything interesting?
Yeah.
Basically, why does nothing interesting happen on this show? Why is it just our main characters going through this plan, like A to B to C to D? You know, we don't get any perspective, we don't see any big picture. We just see our main characters say, you know, okay, this is the plan, let's enact the plan. And then we just go through linearly, and then the plan comes to an end, and then the episode's over. It seems like you've got this whole world to deal with. It's at least a citywide catastrophe at this point, and they're just not interested in that.
No. And it's huge. It is hugely disappointing. There's so many things that could, it's so interesting because you and I are like writing fan fiction for The Strain right now, of like
Right.
how we think the world would act. But like right now we're living in it with the Ebola crisis.
Yes.
Ebola isn't coming to the United States to the degree that everybody thinks it is. You
No.
know, the same thing like the West Nile didn't really like
But people
anthrax
are freaking
didn't.
out.
But people freak out because they think they will be the one. And yet a plane can land and everybody suddenly is getting sick and like all the passengers died on the plane of some kind of mysterious thing. And there's no like what are they called, survivalists or whatever, or like conspiracy theorists. There's nobody like doing ham radio,
Right.
like, just going, hey guys,
Right. Well,
this is weird.
and I brought this up in the second episode or third episode where it was like, why is everyone just buying the cover story that it was like carbon monoxide or something? Like why like, for all we know, the whole world just said yep and moved on. Like, we have got no indication that that is not what happened.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're not even writing fan fiction, because we're not changing the events of what happened. We're writing the parts of the show that are the most interesting that the show completely ignores. Like The Strain, its biggest sin out of all the things that are wrong, and I complain about stuff every week, but the single biggest flaw of The Strain is it doesn't understand why it's interesting. Like, the interesting part of this is the world, and the Strain thinks the opposite. The Strain thinks the interesting part is F, and the interesting part is Abe, and the interesting part is all these main characters that we follow. And that's exactly wrong. That could not be more wrong. The interesting part is the world, and those characters are our portrait of the world. You know, and the world should be reflected in those characters, as opposed to making those characters completely different than the world because they're the only ones who understand what's going on.
Yeah. I think you said it exceptionally well in your review. We haven't said it yet. Kyle writes reviews for The Strain on our website, showratings.tv. But I think you said it very, very well, that like one of the reasons that Vass is so interesting is because he is so simple in this kind of crazy, wacky world that doesn't really make any sense. And so he's sort of a superhero, but he's also sort of grounding all at the same time.
Yeah, and he has no understanding of this beyond what his backstory would lend us to believe, which is that he's a very good pest catcher who is surprisingly smart.
Right. And then as opposed to F, who knows everything and manages to make every mistake possible.
Yes. And Nora and Abe, who actually knows everything. Yeah. And Ikers, who we love but who also knows everything, and Jim, who knows enough, and you know, it's like we just go through this list and we just get characters who are having experiences that don't reflect the world. And I think with Vass, one of the reasons that his scenes work is that at least it reflects part of the world. Like, it's like, okay, well, at least we know what someone who's like really good at surviving would do. You know?
Yeah, and that's actually how I feel about Gus too. I don't know.
Oh, I don't at all.
I know,
but that's not Gus's fault. That's the storytelling that he's been put in.
Yeah, I think that the performance by that actor is a very grounding performance. Again, you might totally disagree.
I think it's bad. I think he's bad.
Oh,
I'm not even going to give it an okay. I just think I think that's a bad character and maybe that's what's affecting the performance for me. But I don't know what that character is other than he loves his mother. Like, that's it. That's all I got, which is just obvious in the writing.
He said it earlier in the episode. He doesn't take drugs, even though he looks like a gangbanger who does drugs. Like,
shocker.
he looks like a part that he does not play, if
Right.
that makes
Well, he
sense.
did rob. He did steal a car 2 episodes ago.
He did steal a car 2 episodes
So
ago.
I don't know, but no, he's the gangbanger with a heart of gold, which I could have told you 10 seconds into his first appearance on screen. Like they have again sledgehammer. Like they are making us sure. Like that drug line is just like like
But I
sure
still I still like him better than I like F. Like
sure
F, I love the Corey Stoll performance. I love Corey Stoll as an actor, but F annoys me. He's like the Doctor House, but not like as interesting or funny or good at his job. Frankly,
yeah yeah
um,
that's the problem. They haven't shown that F is good at anything yet.
no.
They've sort of hinted at it and sort of tried to paint him as the brilliant CDC guy, and I believe I've characterized him as that. But if you really look at the evidence, there's just not a lot there. Like we haven't really seen him be good at his job or competent or like a good thinker. Like and that's a problem because if you're gonna have a character who's sort of grating, then he better be really good at his job.
Yeah.
So
Well, let's move through a couple other parts of the episode. Let's see. Where can we go? We did Gus.
no, we didn't talk about Gus. I need
We
to talk
didn't.
more about
Okay,
Gus.
let's talk about Gus.
Yeah,
Let's talk about Gus.
because okay, so last week we I don't know if we argued, but let's say we argued about why Gus was arrested. And this week it turns out I was right. He was arrested because he hit the murderous vampire monster over the head with a steel pipe. And the cops saw him do that and arrested him, which is enormously problematic. Because again, the supposed victim was a murderous vampire monster who had a giant appendage sticking out of his mouth, and if you gave even a cursory glance at him or saw him at any point, you would know that. So, are we to believe that these cops did not notice the panic on the street, which we saw? We saw tens of thousands of cars in what I believe was Times Square watch as people were murdered by vampires in the streets during the eclipse. So these cops were buying that they not on the streets. They're like on a side street. They're patrolling the side streets. Okay, so they don't see any of this. They don't pay any attention to the screaming women running through the streets, which we saw. So the cops are just chilling, having a smoke break. Not even not worried. All the screams of thousands of people, the sounds of murderous monsters, not phasing the cops. All right, so that's step one. Step two is they walk up just as Gus whacks a giant blood-smattered monster over the head with a steel pipe. He hits him hard. It looks like the monster's dead. Okay, so then they go and they
The
yeah.
monster has like flung its stinger out at Felix also.
Yes,
Like
right.
in
Yeah,
plain view.
in plain view. So the cops must have arrived after that, if we're to believe what the show is selling. So the cops arrived after that. So they watched just as the stinger went in, but as Gus whacked him with the pipe. Okay, so the cops see Gus whack him with a pipe. They arrest Gus. They arrest Gus for what I assume is assault of what they believe to be a normal person who is lying face down dead on the floor. They don't check if this normal person is dead. They don't check if he is injured. They don't offer to provide any help. They don't even turn him over, at which point they would have seen that he is a murderous monster with blood all over him. So they have arrested Gus for, I guess, murder, or at least assault, without checking on the victim who was 2 feet away from him lying face down. So, so, and then when Gus is at the police station, he's like, yo, it's crazy on the streets, and the cop is like, it's always crazy in New York City. It's like, what? What? That can't, you open a window. It's what is happening?
Yeah.
I mean, I lost it. I lost my mind at this Gus story because what what like this isn't like I'm digging for like inconsistencies. This is like the face value explanation of what is happening on screen, and it is incomprehensible.
It is a failed It is a very failed sequence of events that are to lead to Felix eating a bunch of
Of
prisoners
course.
in a jail cell. That's not a spoiler, by the way,
How did
everybody.
that not happen
Like
this episode, by the way? How did we
I,
go through the entire episode with Felix not dying?
the gestation period of this thing is just mind-boggling to me. I don't know that I understand it because Trip Taylor, what a guy.
What
Uh, he
award-winning neighbor Trip
yeah,
Taylor?
he seemed to be transformed damn near immediately.
Yes, right
And
up.
then Joan Luss's husband is not dead when they find him.
But is
Well,
immediately transformed when they go hide.
he takes a little while. They hide for a while.
Oh, okay, so a lot of time has passed.
Yeah, time passes while they're hiding.
But hours? I
But
mean, it
like,
can't be that.
but like,
The show's going
yeah,
like day by day.
right. But again, think about it. They're supposed to go balding, and like all this stuff is supposed to happen to their body, and he looks like that none of that happened to him.
Yes,
Um,
that's the
and
thing. Is like the people who got off the plane, it took them like 4 days, three
yeah,
to 5 days.
yeah,
And so the guy who Mr. Luss killed by his wife, I mean, at most 8 hours,
yeah,
10 hours
yeah.
from the time when he died to the. I mean, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't.
No,
Yeah, I
there's
don't understand.
what I'm saying is there's no clear gestation period.
Yeah.
So, Gus could easily die the first minute of the next episode, or he could take 2 more episodes to die.
Felix.
Like Felix, I'm sorry,
Yes.
Felix. I don't get it.
No, I don't understand how the virus works, which you would think would be something that is established by now, considering that our main characters work at the CDC. You would
Well,
think that
they
with that,
were
we would have some kind of understanding of this.
they were barred from the CDC
They did perform an autopsy.
by episode 4.
Yeah.
They were barred from the CDC. I believe episode 4 is when they did the autopsy. And now everybody is so convinced that F is a crazy man that even Jim Kent's wife, who's known F for years, is going to call him a crazy man the moment that she sees him.
This is a good transition to our discussion of women on this show, because we had met Sylvia before, and she seemed like a nice cancer-stricken lady who was very happy that Jim got her, or that she was accepted into the very exclusive treatment program, not knowing that it was because Jim made a deal with the devil, almost literally. um, so this episode she comes back, and I know some characters in this show have been afflicted by the vampire virus, but I believe she was inflicted by the women on the strain virus, which is to say she is wrong and useless and nagging. Yeah. And so that is, we get a whole heaping helping of that, of her just nagging everybody and being unhappy because, I don't know, it's more dramatic for her to be unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
Why did we have Jim Kent deliver a speech about losing his family 2 episodes ago and how I will do anything for my family, and then he just watches as his wife leaves?
Yeah, no, literally. Like
2 episodes ago.
No, not just watches as she leaves, but he goes, "Well, I have to fight the good cause."
What the hell is that? we're not paying off that like character speech by Jim that ended with F punching him in the face. Like
right.
We're just gonna have Jim abandon his deeply held views that family is everything.
Which was in the last time on the strain sequence.
Yeah, they're proud of it.
The fact that he said, "I will do anything for my wife," and then his wife leaves him, and he's fine.
He's fine. No scene. By the way, Nora missed the most crucial point of the apocalypse to nap with her mother because she was so traumatized by watching that kid die. Jim loses the single most important thing in his life. Watches her walk out in front of him. Totally fine. Yeah. Goes on. Next, like F doesn't even acknowledge it.
No.
Just goes on talking. He's not crying in a corner. He's not running away.
No.
Which is the problem with women on the strain. It's like women are either just incredibly weak or incredibly obnoxious, and regardless of which one they are incredibly wrong. Yes. That is women on the strain.
Yeah, no matter what, they're incredibly wrong. Joan Luss was painted so terribly when her character was introduced.
The worst person in the world. Like, the worst lawyer caricature you could possibly think of.
Right. I mean, then there's Ava, talking about women on the strain, like, who's, like, so maternal.
Yeah, maternal.
that she kidnaps the children that she's the nanny for, and her daughter says, "Hey, they're not your kids, you know that, right?"
Her daughter, man.
Poor dumb nurse daughter.
Strain has a way of And it seems to think that this is important when the opposite is true, which is that anytime the strain introduces a minor character that is going to die within the episode that they are introduced, and they did this with the FBI agent, they make that character as horrible as possible to, I guess, make it okay that they die, but it would be much more interesting if they made them as awesome as possible so we felt bad when they die.
Yeah, like the Fixer.
Yeah, the Fixer, right. Yeah, they did that with him, although I think they were intending to make him horrible, and I just liked him. But
He's just a good
it was
performer.
a good performance, but that character, like, on an objective, like, scale, is a horrible person.
Yes,
But,
that's true.
so this daughter, like, her mother's like, there's evil in that house. There's something terrible. And the daughter doesn't even acknowledge her. She just tells the kids to get ready. We're going. Like, just forget about all the other stuff. That's a terrible way to treat your mother.
Yeah.
We haven't established that Eva is like, she's not like Nora's mother where she's got like dementia. You know, she is a capable woman who has a job as a maid. She's a respectable professional, and her daughter is not even paying her the slightest bit of attention. Like,
No.
she's like, "Come on, mom!" Like she treated Ava like she was like a 95-year-old who had lost her mind. It's like, this woman, like, she is your mother,
Yeah.
and like I mean, what a way to drag down both characters. Like so we instantly hate the daughter, and then we think that Ava is normally an incompetent person because the daughter implies as such.
I thought it was a very stereotypical representation of an immigrant parent with a naturalized child.
Yes.
Um, yeah, I thought it was like a parody of that type of relationship, where the naturalized child is American, so they know better, and and they're
Yeah.
smarter, and they don't have all the old world sensibilities from wherever their parents are from, and like
Yeah.
the mother is so maternal because she's not from here, she's not an American, like it was just that's how I felt anyway.
Right. Well, and so much of this show plays as parody. Like,
Yeah.
so much of the relationship material in the show, which I'm positive the show thinks is sincere, plays as a parody of that kind of relationship.
Yeah.
Like it's just, it's that's one of the big problems, I think, is the show takes itself a lot more seriously and thinks it's being subversive by making it so the street smart daughter is the one who ends up being wrong, but in reality it's just a parody. It's just a silly, like, you see it coming from a mile away. You hate all the characters involved. It doesn't feel like it matters. It's just bad. It's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and for reasons that are opposite of you, I kind of came to that conclusion in this week's episode, and I'm very sad about that.
Yeah.
As I said earlier, I've read the books. It's one of my favorite book series. Last week we discussed the revelation that Kyle had, that I did indeed read a good book series.
Yes. Yeah.
That just happens to be a bad television show. And it's so sad. Like, we're doing this podcast about it. We're so excited about the show. I still love the story and I still love the world, but I know that it can do better.
Yeah, that's the thing.
So, but then it pulls crazy things that I think you are going to be very excited about, like ninja vampires.
Ninja vampires. What up, ninja vampires? This is the first time when I felt like the show hit the tone right. Like again, I went out my whole dissertation about this a few episodes back. Look for that on the podcast. But where it's like, normally I hate shows that take themselves more seriously than they actually are, and this was, like, to me, the introduction of hooded ninja vampires who happen to show up at exactly the right time to save our Ava and co. is, like, exactly the kind of silliness that the strain is, and so it works for me. This works for me because it fits with the tone of the show. Like, this is a very silly, very comic booky kind of revelation, but it's also the most interesting thing about the show to date for me. Like, the most interesting thing the show has done, because now I have all these questions that haven't been answered yet, and I want to know where they came from and who they are and what happened, and I want to know I want flashbacks, and I want to know their story. Like, we talked about opening up the world earlier. This opens up the world. Like, it's like, oh, now I have a billion questions instead of just watching F go through these monotonous tasks every episode. And so that's why it worked for me, is that it just to me, really it's like throwing some spice in there. You know, we've got kind of a really like boring stew, and we're just throwing spice in it. So I was excited.
I know. I know
Now
you
now
were.
tell me why you weren't.
Okay. So the entrance of those characters, I agree, adds some spice to
Yeah,
a very flavorless
kick it
episode.
up a notch. Bam.
Uh, but wow, okay.
I think
But
I've put a guy fear.
but but imagine a world where the world is overrun with vampires, and
Ooh.
then suddenly there are sentient vampires that are ninja vampires. Imagine that world, because that's the world that I like.
Yeah. No,
uh,
well, and again, we don't know. The show has not given us any indication as to who these vampires are or
right.
how they came to exist. And so I have not moved on to asking those questions yet. I mean, I'm asking those questions,
Well,
but I'm not expecting an answer to those questions yet.
right. And I suppose that my thoughts are, and it's not even about those characters, because I know about those characters, and it's fine for them to exist, and it's fine for them to even show up earlier than I anticipated. That's totally fine.
Yeah,
What is not fine is that the world has not become infested yet.
that's a problem.
That's what I'm not okay with, and I keep having these moments of anticipating something, being there, ready for it, being present for it, tweeting about it, thinking about it. It's in my brain. Something is going to happen. Like, even if it's not the way that it was in the books, like, it's gonna happen now. It's gonna happen now. It's gonna happen now. It's gonna happen now, and it
Yeah.
never happens.
Yes.
And there's all these red herrings that I think are directed at book readers, like, ha ha ha, you thought that was going to happen? It didn't happen. And, like, in particular, one of my favorite sequences in the books takes place on a train platform. So I was like, ooh,
Ah.
exciting. And then, and then it's this hugely anticlimactic,
Yeah.
flatlining scene where they are exploring the subway and failing, and then shooting one bullet into Icor's leg. Like, it's like, and it's starting to actively piss me off, I
Yeah.
guess.
I got to talk about that scene because we got to talk about that subway scene because if you break down what happened in that scene, it's kind of the television show equivalent of when a basketball game is about to end and a player is just dribbling so the clock runs out. Like, when like nothing is happening, there's no action, everyone kind of agrees that this game is over. That subway scene was like 10 minutes long, and we had this really cool start to it where Jim Kent confronts Ikers.
Which is
Yeah,
phenomenal sound design. Hold on.
yeah,
Hold the phone. When Iker threatens Jim Kent's
yeah.
life,
That was
that
great.
is a powerhouse performance. And
Wonderful.
and it shows the production chops that this
Yeah.
show is capable of.
So we go from there. Awesome start. And then we get this perspective on the people that we were talking about, where like everyone's sick in the subway, and I'm like, oh, this is gonna be good. Like we're hitting it now. We're in the last 10 minutes, like this is happening. And then we proceed to follow F and Nora on a fruitless and undramatic and non-tensiony quest through the subway for like 4 minutes. for just we follow them walking through the subway. I don't know.
And there's tense music as Jim shows up and they think it's Icorst.
Yeah, not tense at all. um, and then we have that's immediately followed by a scene where Abe and Icarus are sort of like they're like shadowing each other or whatever, and Abe gets off the subway, and then we have like a 30-second scene where he's just like looking through, and you think Icarus is gonna jump out and attack him, and then like there's like we're like panning across the subway pillars, and Abe is like going through, and it's like really scary, and then Icarus just like is standing there, and he's like, hi. It's like, why did we go through all that thing? Why couldn't Icarus have just said hi? If he wasn't going to use the element of surprise, why would he try to hide?
I don't know.
I don't like that scene was so flat, and then we get then the cavalry arrives as Icarus like dodges Abe's feeble sword swipes. Abe, by the way, his age varies, I think, because like sometimes Abe is like a hero, and then other times he's like a 90-year-old old man, and he's
Well,
yeah.
I think they back that up with his heartbeat. They always play his heartbeat whenever
Yeah, I
he's
do like that.
incapable, and I believe that happened in the sequence. I
Okay,
just watched the
I didn't
episode.
notice that. I did like it when they did that a few episodes back.
Yeah, well, it's like any time that he's gonna fail, you're gonna hear his heartbeat.
I guess. Okay,
Because
well,
he has a heart condition, which is why he can't fight the good fight.
yes.
He needs F.
Yes, right. So then F and the cavalry arrive and they shoot Ikerst once with a bullet.
In the
Weirdly,
leg.
don't with a silver bullet. Weirdly, don't go in for the kill or any kind of follow up. You would think that you would like, you know, you've got him reeling. You'd make some kind of move to keep shooting him. No, and they just sort of let him Spider-Man his way onto the side of a subway car and ride off into the sunset.
Which is kind of cool. Like they consistently do kind of like cool special effectsy things with Icarus.
Yes.
Like because that actor's capable of that. Like he can jump on a train and dig his claws in and just like go, and the people on the train are not freaking out for some reason.
Again, no panic.
Right. He can drag a guy on a chain through a room and then like eat him alive. He can put his nose on while opera music is playing in the background. Like any kind of physical thing that you need a character to do should go to Icarus. Because the actor is capable of handling that. But that scene, even when he does his sort of Matrix move to avoid the sword and gets shot, all that stuff, it's so slow and poorly paced, and compared to the awesome sequence, like truly awesome. I think the shots were good, the dialogue was good, and the performances, everything about Icarus threatening Jim Kent seemed like to build up to an incredible moment for the series, which again, them being on the train platform, I anticipated something from the books based on how horrific Icarus was being there. It's like, I'm going to kill your wife now. Like, oh, that's very scary.
Right.
And then you have this.
Yeah, and there's no, because we know that in episode 7, Abe isn't going to die and Icarus isn't going to die, and so there's no danger there for either character, right? You're not like holding on to your seats for those two characters to off each other, and it wasn't even a fight. Abe takes 2 swings at him, and then Icarus gets shot, and then that's that. Mm-hmm. And just the whole thing felt very slow and very just anticlimactic, and I just didn't I don't think that they really knew where they were going with that. Like they had the really good start with Jim Kent, and then they just sort of tailed off and ended the episode.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that brings us. I mean ultimately the plan failed. You know, they were counting on Icarus to bring them back to the Master for some reason. Icarus immediately figured it out. And then they have the confrontation, and then he runs away. So we're exactly where we started.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there was no progress made.
There's no progress made, and then nothing happens after it.
Right. Nothing happens after.
They just stand on the platform.
Yeah. The world has no better sense of the apocalypse. We haven't gotten any sense that the world is coming around. Gus and Felix are still in prison. I mean, really, like, honestly, like, where did we go in this episode?
No, and I'm sorry, main characters keep going underground where we know there's a vampire infestation.
Yes.
And, like, because, like, Nora and her mom in last week's episode went into the subway, and I was like, oh, man, they're going to get attacked. No. Like,
not even a scene. Not even a scene in the subway.
No, people are having a cough on the train. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Somebody's going to get attacked.
No.
Nothing.
And
nothing. It's flatlining.
Yeah. I guess that's why I liked the scene at the end with Ava and the vampire ninjas, because that's like, oh, something happened. You know, it's like something happened. Like everything else in this episode was just treadmill running. You know, it just there's just no progress. We're just sort of killing time. We're not learning anything about characters. We're just going through the motions to fill an hour of television. The Vampire Ninjas were actually a real development that I imagine is going to have big implications going forward, and raises a lot of interesting questions that I want answers to. And so I think that was why I really latched on to that moment as sort of the hallmark of this episode, because the rest of it was so pedestrian.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I'm trying to figure out, and again, I think that the moment with those ninjas, like the thing that sold that was again sort of an Icarus thing of like these very whimsical older vampires.
Well, these ones were like
Yeah.
Santa Claus, like old, like grandpa, like nice grandpa. The guy was talking in his
Yeah,
cadence,
but
which was really cool.
that performance, I
Yeah.
mean, it's one of those things where like there are other good performances on the show, but like these two vampire characters, Icarus and whoever this guy is, whose character name I don't think I know, like they bring something to the show that the show doesn't have, like to like they're able to take a material that is arguably just as bad as all the other
Yes.
material, but make it just wonderful.
Right. Right.
And yeah,
Well, I liked. I mean, I think that everyone kind of knew that he was going to kill Ava's daughter in that scene. I
yeah,
think that
yeah,
that was telegraphed, but at the same time, I liked how it was done. I liked that it was, he was very just. It was very sudden,
yeah.
and it was in front of Ava, and it just that was like kind of a brutal scene, and I liked that. I liked that it was. It just again, it just feels like a different world is coming when that stuff like that happens, and I thought that that whole scene was really effective,
No,
effectively written.
I do too. And I mean, we've said this repeatedly on the podcast. The Strain just excels at endings. It
Yes.
does such a good job at endings. It
Yeah.
does, and it sometimes is okay with beginnings.
I wish that they would. Yeah. I wish that the episodes would vary a bit to where we got the material at the ending in the middle, and then we ended on a quiet note. I wish that sometimes it wasn't always like that because I mean, the episode does a good job of ending big, but at the same time, it gets really, almost every episode gets really rough somewhere in the middle. And so I'd kind of like a little, keep me on my toes a little bit. Or like right now would be a wonderful time for a bottle episode
Mm-hmm.
where we follow, like let's just have an entire episode, a day in the life of Vasily. And let's have the vampire apocalypse really happen for real this time, but in the context of an episode where we are only following Vasily and he's our only character in the episode, and we just learn, he's checking with his parents, and we have to see how he handles it, or Nora, or any, like let's do something interesting structurally with this show, because every episode is kind of the same, and that's what I was talking about earlier. It's like we're just kind of going through the motions, and so the Strand really needs to do something where I don't know if it's like, again, like a bottle episode like Breaking Bad did in season 3 with The Fly, or like Mad Men will do with the way Mad Men will do like a formalist episode where like it's like this episode is a horror movie. This episode is a very specific kind of like a real like different kind of structure where we
Well,
like start at the end and work backwards. Like some kind of
like
experiment.
yeah, like the battles, the two battle episodes in Game of Thrones.
Yes, right. Game of Thrones episodes where in a show that is defined by having like 10 stories per episode, we've now had 2 episodes that were just one story. And it's like I mean, you can go through the list, like all the best shows on TV do these structurally interesting things every now and again. And it's only episode 7 for The Strange, so there's still time, but boy, could it really use something like that right now. The Walking Dead, which is definitely not one of the best shows on TV, does this. They had a wonderful episode in season 3, where it was just like one story, and they brought back a character from the past, and it was like really heavily focused on him, and he's not a main character on the show, and we hadn't seen him for 2 seasons, and it was just like his story for one episode, and it was like the best episode the show ever did.
Well, yeah, and True Blood did that last season in I think it was in season 6, yeah. And it was the one good episode from
Yes.
season 6. It was the one tolerable episode.
Right.
Uh, yeah, cool. True Blood season 6 is a painful thing for
Yes.
me.
But
But yeah,
yeah.
but I totally agree. Like, and I mean, I'm just kind of on a record on repeat right now, but like I keep telling you at the end of all of our podcasts that next week it'll be good. Don't worry. Like
Yes.
we're gonna get something. And like now I just don't believe it. Like
Yeah.
I just don't believe that the apocalypse is coming. I think we're going to be walking around in circles for a really long time while vampires hide in the sewers and don't come out.
That seems like we're headed.
And that is horrifying to me.
Yeah. Not the way that the show wants to be horrifying.
No, it's so boring and so missing the mark and so not seeing this opportunity
Yeah.
for like for a true, like, we've talked about this before, but like shows and films often take place after the apocalypse,
Yes.
right? Like you've got the post-apocalyptic story. We so rarely get to see the apocalypse happen, and we so rarely get to see it done well. Like, I mean, 2012 was an abysmal film. Like,
Terrible.
and like I don't want that from The Strain, because this is supposed to be an apocalypse story. This is supposed to be we're supposed to be following these characters through what is like what is that phrase? Like the eye of the storm. Is that what it is?
Yeah, sure.
That's what we're supposed to be doing. And we are walking around with it, like with parents with Alzheimer's,
Yes.
with people with cancer, with
In prison.
being in prison, liver transplants,
Yeah.
custody hearings. Like we're getting a whole bunch of mundane things that we thought would be like, oh, we're going to be nostalgic about this later because look at all the things that they've lost. But there's no stakes.
Yes.
There's no stakes and nothing is happening. And it's just, and again, this me from as the book reader, but also as being a very bored television viewer, like I need something to happen on the show because I trusted the creators, and now I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. You went on a big rant last week. This is my big rant.
No, I go on a big rant every week. So I'm pleased that you took the soapbox from me. Now I have to stand on the ground while I deliver my counter big rant. Although not really counter, because I agree with you on all points. Yeah, and you know, you're sort of from the perspective of a book reader where you're expecting things to happen because you know that they happen. I just like to say, as a non-book reader, I expect things to happen too, and it's just you expect specific things, but like, you know, last week when they end with that scene, the very nice scene that we agreed was nice, where Kelly Goodweather and Zach are outside and they're wearing their little 3D glasses and they're looking up at the eclipse, and it's like a quiet scene, and it's like that scene that always happens before something terrible happens, you know. And they sort of make the fateful decision to stay in New York, and it's like, uh-oh, you know, we know where this is headed. The eclipse is gonna happen and it's gonna be like Vampire City. But no, they start this episode after the eclipse, and the eclipse isn't even mentioned in this episode. Like, they had what you described as a build-up episode last week, and then they skipped over the event that the build-up was for.
Completely.
Right?
Like, you know, this should have been our bottle episode. It should have been, as we were talking about, like Vasily in the streets as everybody's freaking out. Like, even though that's not the character you would have gotten in the book. And I've said this repeatedly, I don't need it to be the book, but I do need...
It could be anybody.
No, it doesn't, yeah, but somebody who's not in jail and who's not at the pawn shop. But like, it needs to be, as I said, Matt from Sears. I don't care. Who also, at the end of last week's episode, approached a bunch of vampires, and we have no idea what happened.
Didn't check in on Matt at all.
No, it's the next day. We have no idea what happened to Matt. And it's just it's appalling to me, just knowing that it's not the fact that I want something specific to happen from the books. It's that I know that things did happen in the books and nothing is happening here.
Yeah.
And
I just like, I don't know what they're doing.
We need to see this apocalypse. We need to see all these vampires freaking out on the humans. We need to see the world falling apart, because all we've got is like people are concerned that the internet is out.
Yeah.
Which is just not entertaining.
Well, and you know, and I am the last person. Again, I've quoted Mad Men a couple times now in the podcast, so that should be a clue that I'm the last person to complain about slow television. Like, I can really handle good slow TV. It's that not getting the perspective of the world. It's that we're not living in this world. We're just following these characters as they live their day-to-day lives with this knowledge that separates them from everybody else on Earth. And if the show was going to delay the apocalypse, like if that was the decision made, then they need to make it so that we have a broad understanding of what's happening. And it can't be, we can't, you know, the show should have started with this broad focus. If it was going to wait at least 7 episodes to have something crazy happen, you know, we need to have this broad focus and then narrow it down once crazy stuff starts happening. But instead, we've just had this narrow focus throughout, and it almost feels claustrophobic in a show that should be on such a scale that that's not possible. This show should be on such a massive scale, such a massive worldwide scale, that you should never feel like you're trapped with these characters. We should never be like, oh, another F scene. Oh no, Kelly's on screen. Oh, here's Zach. Like, that should never happen, because this is a worldwide apocalypse television show. Like, it can go anywhere. We could have a 20-minute scene in Russia and it would be relevant. Like, as soon as like the vampire stuff starts happening in Russia, we could have an entire scene there with like Vass's grandpa or something. Like we could. This show could invent a reason to go anywhere on Earth, anywhere in New York, to do anything it wanted, and yet we're stuck with these characters who, aren't very well drawn in the first place, and then we're not doing anything interesting. We're missing the most interesting parts of all this, which is how the world is experiencing it. We have no sense of how the world is experiencing this. It's just these characters, and their experience is very different than the world's because they're directly involved. And it's just such a miss. It's such a, I just don't understand how you can make a television show and not understand that. Like and write a book. The people who wrote the TV show wrote the book. How do you not understand that was what was good about your idea?
Well, yeah, and the same thing. I was, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, that I watched the interview with the actress who plays Dutch Velders. In that series of interviews, they also interviewed Chuck Hogan and Guillermo del Toro, who wrote the books.
Yes.
And Guillermo del Toro flat out says, these are the characters that I know the best. These are the characters that I have written more than any other character in my life. And, Guillermo del Toro is a very good writer. He creates exceptional characters in his films, especially his like late 90s, early to mid 2000s work was exceptional. Characters that were believable even in these like moments of horror. And for him, I was appalled to watch him say that these are the characters that I know the most, and I'm so glad to be like, working with them in a different medium. And it just felt like, well, you're not writing your characters. Right. Those aren't the characters on the television screen. Hardly pass as characters.
Right. They're sort of manifestations of like boring ideas. Like,
And I feel bad. I think this is our first. We talked about how the ninjas were cool. But, this ninjas. This is the first podcast. I feel like we haven't had anything good to say. Last episode you didn't like very much, and I enjoyed immensely. This episode, I was very bored. I was very upset. I'm defeated right now, Kyle.
Oh, I didn't think I was gonna have to be the one to try to bring you back into the mix, considering that I very nearly gave up on the show entirely. But yeah, hold on to the hope of ninjas. I'm really excited about that. I really like that as a sort of character that we can just be happy when he's on screen. It's like if when I see that guy on screen again, I'm gonna be like, yes, ninja scene.
I think that this was, and you, off the record, you frequently tell me to stop having expectations for things, but I expected the apocalypse in this episode. I expected the chaos, it was flatlined.
Right. And this is the thing, though, is that the show built that expectation. That was not an independent expectation that you had. That was the show crafting the previous week's episode as a setup for the apocalypse. Like, everything about last week's episode indicated that the eclipse, the focus on the eclipse last week, how much they just go back and watch that episode. How much did they talk about the eclipse? And it's like, this is clearly a big event. And you don't need to have read the books to have gotten that. Like everyone was talking about the eclipse. And then for this episode to start after the eclipse, it's almost like we missed an episode. That
is exactly how it felt. It felt like we missed an episode.
Also, this episode could have occurred as episode 3, as episode 4, as episode 5. Like, how many changes would you really have had to make for this to be episode 3? Like, minor plot character details. But Gus could have been in prison then. Jim could have came to whatever conclusions he came to. Like, that's the other thing, is the show just doesn't have any sense of momentum. Like you could rearrange these episodes and the story would make every bit as much sense as it currently does.
Yeah.
That's a massive problem. That should not be the case. And events like the eclipse are supposed to be those benchmarks, those anchors that hold everything else in place. Because if you put the eclipse at episode 7, then you're like, okay, episodes 1 through 6 build up to the eclipse. Episodes 8 through 13 fallout from the eclipse. I get it now. My season has structure. Nope, not yet. Now we're just continuing muddling along in the dark. So yeah, I mean that's a problem.
Yeah, and that's what I'm most upset by. I think, I did enjoy the ninjas. I didn't anticipate them in this timeline,
Yeah.
but I did enjoy them, and I enjoyed that performance. I enjoyed all of the Nazi material.
Cool.
Yes, I enjoy Gus in general. I enjoyed basically the Lusses. I enjoyed that plot, and I enjoyed the Gus plot. And I enjoyed anything having to do with Icarus, whether that was him and Jim Kent or that was him as a Nazi.
Yes.
But then...
What's so funny is, like, you're right, like, I wouldn't have enjoyed the Gus stuff regardless, but at the same time, I wouldn't have had my problem with that material is the setup for it, right?
Yeah.
It's the setup, it's not the material itself, and that scene with the Lusses at the start was, on the surface of it, a very good horror scene, but it was undercut by the fact that, wait a minute, why isn't the eclipse happening? Like,
yes.
why did we skip over that? And so it's like, if you take this episode, the Strain would almost be better if you didn't watch the previous episodes. Like, the Strain almost works best if you just jump in.
Yeah.
Because, like, I feel like I would have really dug this episode if I had not watched the previous ones. I would have been like, yeah, look at that vampire woman eat her husband, you know? Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, they're trapped in a glass room. Oh, ninjas! You know? It's like, which was my reaction anyway, by the way.
Yeah.
But, you know, like that subway scene, it's like, oh, is he going to eat him? Because I wouldn't have known that Abe is, like, a main character and that Icarus is a main character. It's like, I would have enjoyed this a lot more out of context, which I think just speaks to, like, the people who are designing this show totally know what they're doing. Like, the horror sequences, except for the subway sequence later in the episode, which we talked about, but for the most part, the horror sequences are very good, and the visuals are very good, and the just sort of mechanics of how the horror works on the show is very good. But it's just completely undercut by the storytelling and the writing, which is an absolute mess. And so that's the sort of balance that we have to take into account, where it's like, these are very good scenes, but in the context of this show, they're very bad scenes. So that's the problem.
Yes, and I think that you're right on point, right? That's the correct way to describe it. I'm totally crestfallen right now.
You're like me. Normally, I'm the one who's depressed after our podcasts.
I know. Okay. Let's bring it up a little bit. We got another fan letter.
Oh, good. We still have fans.
We still have fans. Hey, no, you guys are still listening, and you're coming at us with numbers. So thank you very much.
I think most fans of The Strain, or I should say most watchers of The Strain, kind of feel the same way.
Yeah.
Judging by Twitter, I feel like nobody is really taking this, not nobody, but the vast majority of the audience is not taking this show super seriously. Certainly not as seriously as it's asking to be taken.
Yes.
Which is interesting. This is not, like, people send letters violently disagreeing with me about The Walking Dead, which is fine, I love it, but it's like, people really take that show seriously. I don't have that sense with The Strain. No. I don't have that sense.
It's still a freshman series, though.
Yes,
so
true.
There's still a fan base yet to be built. There are still people who have yet to find it, who will become its biggest fan. But we did get a letter from somebody who we called Johan in last week's episode. Is actually Joanne, I believe.
And a woman.
Yeah,
sorry.
Sorry, Joanne.
We for a couple of minutes were being possibly as sexist as The Strain is. So, sorry about that. We were just keeping with the theme of the show we talk about.
Well, I did live in Germany, and I was the one who read the who read the letter, and I just assumed Johann. It looks like Johann.
Sure.
But Joanne, thank you again for writing to us. Just agreeing with us about the sexism in the show again. Thanks again for that. And also, she sent us some cool pictures of Grand Central Station,
showing how bad the set for Grand Central Station was.
which we will post. So
I enjoyed.
So, Joanne, if you want to tweet at us, because you haven't included your Twitter handle, we'd be happy to post those pictures so that people can see just how bad the fake set is. Thank you again for being one of our biggest fans. Thank you again for listening. And I want to do my usual shout out at the Masters Minions, which now has a Facebook group, which is one of the biggest fan groups, if not the biggest fan group for The Strain out there. So I highly recommend that you join the Facebook group and that you follow them on Twitter. Do you have any shout outs you'd like to give before we close?
I want to shout out showratings.tv, the website that both Blair and I write for and edit, and note that if you want to review this episode you can using showratings.tv. Just search for The Strain at the top. It'll take you right to the episode page. Hit add comment. You can write a review, and if you write a review, we'll read it or read part of it on our podcast, so you'll be mildly famous. And again, thestrainpodcast@gmail.com. If you are one of the people who is taking this show seriously, please explain yourself, good sir. No.
Or madame.
Or madame, yes. Don't want to say still sexist from The Strain. No, tell me, what is it like? Do you A, have explanations for all the stuff that I complain about every week? And that Blair complained about this week?
I'm usually the positive one.
Yeah, you're usually the positive one. I'm usually the complaining one. But is there an explanation that makes sense to you that we're just missing or not willing to accept? Do you buy the communication stuff just at face value? You're like, yep, that affects everything, and that's that? Or do you enjoy the show despite that? Which I think would be the most interesting point of view, which is that you are just able to overlook all that stuff and enjoy other elements of the show and just prioritize those as more important than the show actually making sense. And so if you are someone who enjoys the show and you still listen to our podcast, which kudos to you, write us, and we'll talk about you on the podcast.
Yeah, we'd be happy to talk with you.
Yes.
All right. Well, this wraps up our 8th episode of The Strain podcast. Before we go, I want to mention a few things. You can download and subscribe to our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. You can also hear all of our shows at our website, www.southgatemediagroup.com. Please subscribe to the show and also rate us. Follow the show on Twitter at @TheStrainPod, and Kyle and I at BlairLivesTV. And remember, that is Blair with an E, like F for a frame, and at Kyle Loves TV. Check out our website, showratings.tv, to rate and review The Strain every week, as well as all of your other favorite shows. Thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.
If you would like to donate to help pay for this and other Southgate Media Group podcasts, simply go to our website, southgatemediagroup.com, and click on the donate button. It can be as little as $1 or, well, as much as you want. Help keep this fun going by supporting this and our other shows. Thanks again for listening, everyone. You're the best fans in the world.